please.
Penny Burstead. Here. Tanya Newsby. Here. Heather Clanderman. Here. Daniel Paulson.
Here.
Amy Rose Swanson. Here. John Sabota.
Here.
David Steyer.
Here.
Jim Swanson.
Here.
And Tricia Thompson.
Here.
We have a quorum to conduct business. You want to talk about the microphone?
Sure, so this is our first meeting with the new microphones. And board members, if you don't have a blue light on your microphone, please hit it so that the blue light turns on. Also, you can adjust the microphone. It looks like most of you probably could adjust it a little bit lower. There's probably not a need to really speak into the microphone depending on how well your voice carries. Jamie can also control the volume a little bit, but kind of the way mine is set up would be recommended. Now directors, you can keep yours off until you get ready to speak if you'd like. What we'd suggest though is that you move your microphone before you turn it on. We're not supposed to get any major feedback where everyone's going to be holding their ears, but there will be noise if we move the microphones while they're on a little bit. So we'll definitely give it a shot, and we'll have to make some adjustments as we go, but it's definitely an improvement. You can already tell. I see some people shaking their head in the background. You can actually hear what's going on. So definitely an improvement here for the school board.
Thank you. Agenda order. Agenda order. We have a closed session scheduled, and but we've I think ample information, and I would ask the board if anyone has no objection that we scratch the closed session for this meeting. Anyone object? Okay, all right. Is there any other changes to the agenda that you would like to see? All right, hearing none. Moving on, community communications. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak?
We didn't receive any.
We didn't receive any, and I don't see anybody, so. Okay, all right, board members, superintendent communications. Yes, Amy.
I just want to let you know that I attended the School Safety and Leadership Conference in Green Bay on the 13th and 14th of July with Dan. And I think we came back with a lot of good information. I think he passed out some of the information we got on the mental health resources that DPI has to offer. So, and I know we have a long meeting, but eventually I think Dan and I will probably do some kind of report on more of what we learned. Thank you.
Yeah, it was an excellent conference. The first day was on school safety, but 90% of that of the sessions were talking about proactive ways of dealing with school safety, mental health, and yeah, we have a lot to go through, and there's going to be a lot of information from the Model Schools Conference. So we'll talk about what we learned later in another board meeting. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Yes.
So a few things to mention tonight. First of all, I want to say thank you and congratulations to Brian Seglin, Michelle Dupree, Tara Elson, and other people in the school district who helped write our peer mentoring grant. Is a collaborative grant with Elk Mound. You may have seen the media release on this. $20,000 grant to help fund our mentorship program. We have a very good mentorship program for new educators in the school district, and this just allows us to continue with those efforts and expand them a little bit. So great job to everyone involved there. Also, I just shared some information with the board regarding post-employment benefits. There's been a lot of that in the news, just down the road in Eau Claire. I know they have a big meeting tonight at the school board office. Also the Mauston School District, and as difficult as those items can be, very happy to let you know that here in Menomonie, our unfunded liability is manageable. I know that's something the board keeps close oversight over, and something that we've talked about quite a bit over the last few years. Even though it's really difficult, I think that we're not dealing with some of the major challenges because of the foresight of the board. So good job on that. And then finally, I also shared some information. One of the agenda items tonight that we'll talk about in a bit is youth service officers. This is a very common discussion that's happening across the state, and I know Dan had shared some information with me out of Madison School District. Also in the school news, there was an article from Green Bay, and schools are looking at similar ways to keep students and staff members safe, and the difference between having a uniformed officer compared to a school liaison or youth services officer with the response and training that those individuals have. So I just shared a few articles with you. You can read them at your leisure, and certainly let me know if you have any questions. So thank you.
Okay, all right. Moving along, consent agenda. Action to approve consent agenda. Approve the School District of Menomonie Area Education for Employment Plan.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
We're doing the whole.
Yeah, okay, let's do them, let's do them all. Excuse me, yes, thank you very much. And the action to approve the year-end budget transfers and to approve the 60:0301 special education cooperative. So we moved.
That was my motion.
And we moved to approve all of those.
Yes.
Okay,
And I second
And
as
you
well.
second those. Thank you very much. Yes.
I know at our last meeting, we were still talking about the split as far as that, the money, as far as, whether we went into Fund 46 or Fund 73. And I see in here, it's, we have everything allocated for Fund 73. I was just wondering what the process will be.
So a few years ago, the school board helped put together a financial vision for the school district. And the first step was to ensure that the fund balance was adequate enough where the school district would no longer have to short-term borrow. For years, the district was borrowing to have enough cash on hand to make payroll because tax payments and state aid payments are only received periodically throughout the year. So any year-end balance at that point was put into the general fund. Now that we've accomplished a point where we're no longer short-term borrowing, the next step is to fund the unfunded liability for post-employment benefits and to save for future capital maintenance.
I thought the meeting started at 5:50.
We have a request for public comment. Does anyone have any objection?
I think Joe needs to finish what he's talking about.
Yes,
yes.
Joe.
Finish where we're at right now.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I thought the meeting started at 5:50. My eyes aren't right, I guess.
Anyhow, so the financial vision included getting the fund balance to an adequate point and then saving, paying down the unfunded liability for post-employment benefits and saving for capital improvement expenses. In looking at it last year, we kind of split the revenue for both Fund 46 and Fund 73. At this point, we have done a pretty good job, and we've built in payments of Fund 46 into the annual budget. Somewhat what I'm concerned with is that Fund 46, we have what I would consider total control over. If we need to defer a maintenance project in the future, I would much rather defer a maintenance project than have to change retirement benefits. So even though I think there's merit to doing both, and we're able to capture state aid by doing both, knowing that we still have approximately $10 million of an unfunded liability, I think I'm recommending that we're prioritizing that to pay that down, knowing that we have more control over the capital improvements in the future, and the fact that we're on track, or actually ahead of schedule with our capital improvements.
This, being able to capture the money for future spending, is there any difference between the two funds as far as that, for additional spending, or for, can't think of the term.
For the state aid,
State aid, yeah.
No, both funds are treated similarly. They're both trust funds. The one is a trust fund set up for post-employment, the other one's a trust fund set up for capital improvement. So both of them will qualify as a shared expense, which are aided equally.
Okay. One other question. On this Fund 73, do you know what our balance is approximately at?
It's approximately the fund balance of how much is in there.
Yeah.
Leah, would you want
We don't have sorry. We don't have the June 30th statement yet, so once we get that from Mid-America, I can share that with you.
but right now we have about a $10 million liability. If I had to throw a number out, I guess it's probably closer to 2 or 3 million. But like Leah said, we need to get the updated figures here after the audit.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim?
As far as the agreement with Eau Claire, is this an annual continuing agreement or is this something new?
No, this is an annual, this is for our audiologists. We've been contracting with Eau Claire for prior to me coming here, so.
Any other questions? All right. Does anyone have any objection to hearing
We should
First, we
vote.
gotta
a, want to go
first.
first? Okay, all right. So let's call the question. Vote. Motion passes. Okay. All right. So does, again, does anyone have any objection to hearing the late request for comment? Hearing none. Margaret, would you like to step forward, please?
First of all, I'm sorry, to get older, your eyes aren't that good. I couldn't believe it when I thought I saw 550s.
Margaret, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you just step back a step? We have new microphones, and if you stand back just a little bit, the microphone by Katie and the microphone by Brian should be able to pick up your voice.
Okay, first of all, I'm Margaret Bryce, 6825 39th Street, Menomonie. When I walked in, Joe was talking about the fund balance, and it's been going up over $1 million a year over the past, since 2012. I just looked at the annual report from last year. It's really wonderful what you've been accomplishing. The reason I'm here, though, is to talk about the issues related to the use of the Community Service Fund to reinstate the second police liaison officer. And I realize you can all read, but I'd like this in the public record. So my statement is, if the second police liaison officer that previously served the middle school and elementary schools is reinstated, I urge you to use the district's general operating budget to fund the position. I realize you are being asked to use the Community Service Fund. However, the Community Service Fund is restricted to programs not needed by the school district and is funded through a property tax levy outside of revenue limits. And let me share some history. Around 2002, the City of Menomonie and the Menomonie School District started the police liaison program with 2 officers. One was for the high school and the other for the middle school and elementary schools. The dollars for the district's share of both of these officers was funded through the transfer of service. Transfer of service allows school districts to increase their revenue limits by the amount needed to offer the program. These are not one-time dollars, but permanently increase the revenue limits. A few years after the program was started, the position that covered the middle school and the elementary schools was discontinued. It was felt the position was unneeded. However, the dollars for the program were left in the operating budget. The board could have under-levied to remove the dollars from the revenue limits, but that did not happen. To place the cost of reinstating the program on the local tax levy outside of revenue limits, when the dollars had previously been added outside of the revenue limits, bills are probably twice for the same service. We also need to ask why the district should be expected to pay over 50% of the cost of the position if the primary purpose is to serve the community in general rather than the school district. Although the district pays 60% of the cost of the officer at the high school, that position was added to serve the school district, not the community in general. It is funded through our operating budget. In contrast, we are told the proposed position would primarily serve the community in general rather than the school district. Keep in mind, the DPI does not allow the use of community service fund for police liaison officers hired primarily for security purposes. Unless the position is funded through the general operating budget as done in the past, the position cannot be primarily for safety or security purposes. Another thing to look at is the job description for the proposed position.
Is that right?
Margaret, that's our timer for 3 minutes. You could wrap it up, please.
The last part of the document talks about the funding and how much the general fund balance has increased. We're well over the target of 25, of taxes receivable and 10% of the budget. And that has, I came in, I think Joe was talking about this. This has saved a lot of dollars in terms of the need to save for short-term borrowing. And my summary statement was don't double bill us. Taxpayers focus on student security and safety, funding the position through the general operating budget.
Thank you.
And we'll talk about community service again sometime, Joe, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me do this.
Okay. Moving on, discussion items, policy review. Item A, report on the 2018 Model Schools Conference.
So there's a report there, and I didn't count the pages, is it 10 or 12 or something? There's a very comprehensive report. We had a terrific group of educators that went to Orlando, Florida the last week of June to the 2018 Model Schools Conference, and it was just an amazing experience, and several of our educators are here to share part of that tonight. We're not going to read the whole report to you, but just a couple key takeaways. We got together after the conference so that we could just kind of debrief and talk about what some of the key themes were. And really to sum it up into 3 key themes. First of all, it was really a great experience for us to be together, to be out of the district, yet also focusing on our district. And we had representatives from the primary grades all the way up through upper level of high school, and to talk from a district perspective about what's going good in our schools, what some challenges are, what the future holds. Just being together and having that network opportunity was terrific. Secondly, it was really neat to see a lot of the presentations. Our teachers and principals came back, and there were definitely points to the presentation where we felt we already were a model school. And some of the things that were being presented, actually, some of our people felt that perhaps in Menomonie we're actually already doing that, or maybe even have it refined and doing in some cases better. So there's some areas that we listed for the board for that area. And then the third thing was we had, even though we felt really good about ourselves, it also was really overwhelming to see all the different best practices and research-based practices, and to think about how we could implement some of that to benefit the students in our schools. And we have, again, 10, 12 pages of ideas and notes. And at this point, anybody who was at the conference, maybe if you wouldn't mind just coming up and maybe sharing with the board a couple of your key takeaways. And please introduce yourself and let the board know where it is that you fit into the district. Anybody want to be brave and go first?
Mr. Shetty, let's go.
Jacob Shetty, I'm in 5th grade at Wakanda, and the main takeaway that I took from this conference was the 3 R's of education, which would be rigor, relevance, and relationships, and just different ways that we can implement those into our schools, into our classrooms, to help impact that student learning.
My takeaway, I would say, other than picking, oh, sorry, my name is Susan Thompson, I'm the Wakanda principal. Other than picking your seat partners on the big airplane, it's really important. They're alphabetical. You do your alphabet figure. Was that I really found that I was able to really hone in on some areas that I really wanted to focus in on. I'd never been to a national conference before. Mental health and culture were the big things for me, really focusing and looking at picking different speakers that I could go to learn what some of the best and the brightest in the country are doing. So that was my key takeaway.
I gotta go next because alphabetically she was talking about me on the plane. David Munoz, high school principal, strategy, pedagogy, purpose. Were 3 big points from several of the sessions that we were in. I tend to talk a lot on the plane. I tend to talk a lot and be social in general, so some people don't like that on the plane. So next time maybe we'll go on through that alphabetical. But strategy, pedagogy, purpose comes from one of the presenters. He was actually the keynote presenter about bold schools. And essentially, I think a lot of us got some similar takeaways, but he kind of put it all together. Everybody saw that keynote, and essentially he was looking at integration of technology, but not forgetting old school ways as well. So lectures aren't bad if you have an understanding of current technology and current pedagogy. There's more to it than that, but it was a great conference, so thank you.
What, before you go, Dave? Pedagogy?
Pedagogy. Oh, the teaching. So pedagogy in a classroom, when a principal comes in or teachers are teaching, looking at objectives and looking at objectives they have. Are they integrating technology, anticipatory sets, balloons, a lot of different things that we look for as evaluators in terms of good instruction. So what's going on in terms of instruction, more importantly, what's going on in terms of learning. So the learning that the kids are.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mayor Gregory, principal at Downsville. I went to a lot of sessions on social emotional learning and excited that that's something that we're really taking an important look at this year, along with trauma informed and the relationship building. And one of my highlights was seeing actually someone I follow on Twitter alive in person just presenting. It was awesome.
Laura Smith, Oklahoma principal. So for decades, I've been talking about mental health in this district. I'm excited that other people are talking about mental health in this district. So what I want to talk to you about is quadrant D in the model. So quadrant D is when we have high rigor and high relevance in the lessons that we're teaching and what children are experiencing in the classroom. And today we just happen to have reps from FOSS, which is the new K-5 science curriculum. And we spent some time talking about how many of the lessons are already quadrant D lessons, or with a little bit of tweaking can be quadrant D lessons. So I'm excited that during our PLC, our professional learning community time, not only now are we going to be looking at data, but we can talk about how do we tweak our existing lessons within our curriculum and make them truly quadrant D lessons for our students. So that was my takeaway. And thank you. This was my first national conference as an elementary principal, and I'm excited that in the twilight of my career, I've got some really exciting things to work on. So thank you.
Get up here quick before everyone takes all the takeaways that I have. I'm Kristen Humphrey. I'm the principal out of Knapp Elementary School, and I just finished my 27th year teaching, and this was the best conference that I've ever gone to. So thank you for sending us to the conference. And it was really hard because there were so many good sessions available to go to. You had a hard time choosing, but I really took out of there that the instructional strategies that we're teaching in our classroom are really important, and some of the takeaways that I'll be bringing back to the Knapp Elementary this year is how we look at our teaching and using technology as tools to get information across, but also looking at John Hattie's work was relevant and talked about in all of our sessions too, and looking at some of that research of what are some of the best practice instructional strategies. So we're very excited to do that now. I'm great at math. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to go. I think one of the biggest takeaways from me was just being able to collaborate with everybody. So I'm a second grade teacher, so Jacob and I were in like elementary school, and then getting to know the middle school teachers, high school teachers, and then the administrators. So that piece of just knowing them on a personal level, and then being able to come back and collaborate with them. And then one new takeaway is we have a great culture here in Menomonie, but we can always make it better. So an effective culture consists of trust, empowerment, and collaboration. If we want our culture to improve, we need an action plan, just like we do when we're adopting new curriculums and the steps we take there. Highly effective leaders don't change people, they create a culture where people change themselves. So, especially with us coming back with this wealth of information, how can we, have all of our staff members and students kind of learn from that and change themselves instead of us changing them?
Bart Betcher, principal at the middle school. Outstanding conference. All the people got to learn about nanotechnology, and I was actually wearing a shirt that nobody knew had nanotechnology in it because I wore the same shirt the whole time. So you talk about relevance. That was great. My bags didn't arrive, so it was an outstanding conference. Mrs. Yanish from the middle school couldn't be here tonight, but her and I went through a lot of the social emotional learning for middle school. Things that we're doing, she came to me and said, this is right where we're heading. And she was so excited about the things that we have planned going on, but we were like sponges just taking everything in. You maybe saw a tweet, I got to hang out at the tech camp with some of the students down there because we just got a 3D printer and I had to learn how to use it, and the students taught me, they know the best way to use it, so they taught me about that. But some really good things we picked up for our win, some of the changes that we have coming at the middle school, and it's exciting, as an administrator to have a teacher so excited coming back with you too from that conference. So thank you very much. It was outstanding.
Can I just say
Sure.
something? I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who took the time to tweet pictures and stuff that you guys were learning. I truly appreciated it. Just makes you feel like you're a part of it. So I was really happy to see that.
Katie, anything to add?
Well, my shirt unfortunately didn't have Bart's technology, so I apologize to those who had to sit next to me when my bags didn't arrive.
Okay, so the inside joke going around is that Katie and Bart, their luggage got lost, and they were good sports about it.
Anyway, I want to reiterate just some of the focus on quadrant D, and there was a lot of focus on different technology resources and how they can help us reach quadrant D, but that the focus, it really should be on the learning and the pedagogy, the design and the teaching. And the technology is just that support. It's the how we get there as a tool.
Brian? And before Brian goes, I want to thank Brian. You can imagine with 15 people going, you kind of need a tour guide, someone that's going to arrange everything, and Brian was that person for us. Jamie did it on the front end also, but the person who kind of kept everything running when we were there was Brian. So Brian, we appreciate that, and go ahead and share your thoughts.
Well, one of my highlights is we weren't late to anything. So, as somebody who's coordinated a lot of activities, but really a key takeaway for me, and it was reinforcing, we've been talking for a long time that student learning is not just about attainment of a static point as far as achievement, it's about growth and learning, and that was something that was reiterated time and time and time again throughout all of the sessions. And to hear just the reactions and the conversations that took place, somebody who's passionate about professional development, a national conference is something that, if you're lucky, you get to go to once in a career. And to have a team that was representative of our district, I said thank you, but to be able to take a team like this to come back as we're launching into strategic planning, I think is hugely beneficial. And it's been exciting to hear the information that people have been sharing as we have been launching into planning for next school year and really our next steps. So, thank you.
So my final takeaway, the graphic that's up there, and you've heard about this quadrant D, and that's something that you board members who attended the school board convention in Milwaukee, you heard Bill Daggett speak, and Bill Daggett's the head of the whole conference. This graphic doesn't include his newest addition to it, and that's what was exciting for me, and that's what Mr. Shuddy hit on. You know, the rigor and relevance, they've been talking about forever. But now this graphic sits on a base that talks about executive functioning and talks about social emotional learning. And we definitely have heard that loud and clear. I think we're going to continue to hear that through our strategic planning process. But I think what we all understand is that this graphic and trying to get to Quad D, that's not going to happen if we don't take care of those basic needs first. So, you know, we have been emphasizing that, so we need to continue to emphasize that. And I think you've heard that common thread from all of us. And again, we appreciate the opportunity, and don't be surprised if there's another request coming soon.
I guess I'd just like to say that as a board member, some of the intangibles, I think everybody getting together and attending the conference, and that's neat for me to see, because I think it builds collaboration and teamwork in the district. And I was actually going to suggest, Joe, that I think we make this something. I mean, it hurts me a little bit, Lori, to see you in the twilight of your career. And I was thinking more at the dawn, but and for somebody to attend your first conference like this, I think we need to do, you know, as a district, we need to do more of this, and especially not take away from the twilight, but some of the younger ones too, to get them involved and to be a part of this. So thank you for those that attended, and I'm excited to see what comes back to the district as a result of that.
Jim?
So, I walk into school in April. What am I going to see different as a result of this conference? I know it's kind of hard to project, but what kind of things do you think would be different or changes would be made because of what you learned?
Well, first of all, I think you're going to see continued work on the social emotional side of things. Not only with our staffing that we're continuing to work on and some of the other improvements there, but the second step curriculum that we're working on, the staff training that we're going to have. I think you're going to see more and more teachers continue to expand their relationships with the students. We have some teachers that already do an amazing job. I had the pleasure of having my fifth grader with Mr. Shuddy's team at Wakanda, and even though we could probably pick out several teachers and several teams, I think there's also room to grow in that area. So I think you're going to continue to see those relationships build. Also, when we talk about Quad D, I think you're going to see more instructional approaches trying to get beyond knowing the facts and knowing the basic skills. And unfortunately, like I talked about the conference, that's the stuff that we assess, that's the stuff that we evaluate. You know, that's kind of what everyone's pushing right now is just learning the stuff. But applying the stuff is really where it's at. And again, even though we do a really good job of that in a lot of different areas, I think you're gonna see that continue to improve.
I think too, with our strategic planning coming up this year and having the number of people that we had at that conference and the ability to feed back into our strategic plan is going to help a ton too.
Absolutely, and it's also very reinforcing. I mean, even this year at the middle school, you know, we've added to the programming, you know, for quite some time now. We haven't had a STEM class or many tech ed offerings, and it's going to be a more well-rounded approach at the middle school this year. But I do think it's the tip of the iceberg. I think there's more and more we can continue to do. Well, thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good night. All right. Moving on. Item B, discuss the youth services officer agreements with the city of Menomonie.
So first of all, I want to say thank you to Mrs. Bryce. Is she still here? I think she had to leave. And certainly Margaret has a lot of past history on the school board, and she definitely understands some things when it comes to past practices and such. I will say though, there's been a lot of changes since 2002. Certainly there's a lot of changes with the need of school resource officers. but also with how resource officers are funded. So definitely I'll take a look at what Mrs. Bryce wrote there, and I can already tell you that any proposal that's coming forward is in alignment with DPI regulations and DPI standards. So there's nothing to worry about there. But I think the purpose of talking about this tonight is that in last year's, over a year ago now, when the board approved the budget for 2017-2018, the school board approved funding for a second youth services officer. We've identified that as a need in the school district for quite some time now, and last year it was included in the budget. Unfortunately, the city council wasn't able to approve it in their budget, and we were not able to have a second youth services officer for last school year. Now, in the preliminary budget that the board approved for this coming school year, once again, the school board approved adding a second youth services officer, approved the funding for that. The city council has been very receptive to discussions. I've had a lot of collaboration with Police Chief Eric Atkinson, and he's going to speak to the group here in a second. He's been just terrific to work with, and unfortunately the chief and I have had to collaborate too much over the last few years in dealing with some very difficult situations. But in talking with our building principals, with talking with our teachers, and talking with our staff members, we absolutely feel that this is a very important need for our schools in terms of keeping our students and staff safe, but also developing those relationships that we just got done talking about. Not only are those relationships critical in the classroom, but they're also critical in the community, and they're critical for keeping everyone safe and secure. So I did attend a city council meeting. My understanding is that the city council has been very receptive to the idea of adding another youth services officer. It doesn't sound like another officer could be ready by the start of the school year, because youth services officers have a lot of specialized training. It's a lot different having someone trained in how to deal with school situations, how to build those relationships with students and staff. So the chief could talk more about it, but right now I think the earliest we would have someone would be January 1st. There is some discussion at the city council level about the amount of funding. Right now our position is a split, where 60% is funded by the school district, 40% is funded by the city of Menomonie. Our proposal would be that the second officer have the same funding split. Reason being is that, like last year when we had a situation at one of our elementary schools, we have to call the police, and because our schools, 5 out of 7 schools are in the city, if it's a city school, the police department is going to respond. So without our collaboration, the city is going to be responsible for 100% of the services needed for those schools. Now certainly with the youth services officer, the services that you would have would be expanded beyond patrol or beyond a uniformed officer. But with the amount of issues that we're seeing, not only in our schools, but in our community, dealing with children and dealing with families, we think that this is a very important improvement that needs to be made. So Chief Atkinson, I know that you're here you had a proposal, Chief, that I shared with the school board. Would you want to come join us for a few minutes maybe? And sure. Katie, if you won't mind, maybe even sliding over one seat. The Chief can talk a little bit about the proposal and answer some questions. So Chief Atkinson, thank you not only for everything you do for our city, but also for collaborating so well with the school district, and welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to serve. I was a little nervous seeing people stand here. I was thinking I was going to be called to the principal's office, all the educators. So I really appreciate the time and for you putting this on the agenda and hearing it today. Real basically, I'm going to start out with this part of it. I really feel strongly that a youth services officer can be a benefit to the school district. The second one, that is, to serve in the middle school capacity, as well as the other elementary schools and working with the kids. And part of my vision for this position that you can see in the information that was given out to you is that this is radically different than a traditional police officer that you would see, someone who would be in uniform or responding to calls to service. This would be an officer that receives specialized training in crisis intervention, dealing with mental health, working with marginalized populations, trying to build relationships so that way we can help these kids grow, be healthy adults, have good lives, stay out of trouble, which of course we don't want the kids to get into trouble. And we want to be able to intervene in situations that could escalate into problems within the classroom. Of course, we want to work with students, staff, and faculty within the school district to try to help educate folks on best practices to try to help these kids grow. So it's not a traditional type policing situation where you would see a focus in on enforcement, which has been a traditional model of policing for decades. You would see that this would be considerably different as a much more customer service oriented type position. And frankly, that's the transition policing is making here in the last handful of years for a lot of reasons, and I think there are good reasons to do that as well. I really feel that this position will be a benefit for you. You'll see increased safety, security, I think healthy kids growing into adults, and it'll help build upon that positive relationship that we've already established with the school district. I imagine you probably have questions about training or what the officer would do. I'm more than happy to answer any of those kinds of questions and try to put any kind of potential issues at ease, or if you're just interested in what that position would do on any given day, I would love to talk about it.
Do they, I see in one of your slides you talk about safety training and stuff. Do they undergo specific training related to safety in classrooms or schools or students of that nature?
Yeah, so we would look at sending the person or persons, whoever are interested, into that specialized training. We already have officers that are trained in like security through environmental design, but these folks would receive specialized training in how to work in classrooms as to deal with that safety and security within the school. So we have not only training that will take place inside of a classroom, but if there is interest too in working with the school district on improving overall safety in buildings, we will do that as well. So the training is radically different from a patrol officer that would normally respond, to a domestic violence situation or some other kind of violent fight. These people are more trained to build relationships, have that rapport with students and faculty, so when they do encounter those situations, we know that we do not have to engage a person right away. We can talk things down. We can try to slow the whole actions that are taking place in the classroom. A lot of times we've seen people that have acted in classrooms. If we remove the other students from the classroom temporarily, a lot of times that takes away the audience. Those are other potential tactics you can use. Also asking the kids to step out, to work with them, and find out what is the issue at hand. A lot of that time works. And previously in law enforcement, we've been a culture of speed, which is hurry up and get done with the calls. You're seeing a massive slide in paradigm in law enforcement, where we don't need to be rushing into situations. We can take time to have these discussions and bring it down. Because sometimes our presence, especially when we have uniformed officers, if you were calling for a patrol officer coming, I think it's fair to say that sometimes we look intimidating based upon the uniforms that we wear. A lot of times we change the way our uniforms look too, so we wear a lot of equipment up here now. And so that creates reactions in people versus having someone who is dressed like he would be dressed coming to the school and talking to a student, especially if they're someone that they've had time to meet, talk with, build a relationship. And the idea is really to focus on those relationships to help those kids grow. So I hope that answered your question.
If I could actually-
Probably I made it a lot longer answer than it had to be, but there's a lot of information to consider, and I'm very passionate about our students and safety within the community.
But the chief really had a good point, and if I could add to that, we did have a situation at one of our elementary schools last year where uniformed officers were essentially the first to respond. And it was much more difficult. I could observe that myself. It was much more difficult, not only for the students, but also for the staff to engage with the uniformed officer compared to the youth services officer. And I've observed and witnessed both. And some of it's the dress, but also I think it's having that established relationship. It makes a big difference. There were quite a few upset students, and which then led to upset parents and staff members, whereas I think had it been a resource officer that was first to respond, it would have been better. I do want to point out, though, that the officers who responded did a terrific job. I just think it's the nature of the position.
And if I can add just one more part to that piece, I really feel that those youth services officers are almost more like colleagues to the teachers and the faculty that are there at the school district. So there's a lot more at ease versus having a stranger come in. If I showed up in uniform, I know I would elicit a much different reaction than the people that they're used to working with. There'd probably be an air of caution, some uncertainty as to what we would be doing or how I would interact with them, just because we do not have that relationship established.
Consistency is a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Having a consistent person in our schools.
My question is, what kind of training are your officers going to get with the mental health piece and social emotional learning?
Well, right now, we already have started moving into the training pieces when it comes to that social emotional intelligence. In fact, we're looking at changing our whole hiring process to hire people who have high social emotional intelligence. So I think it's rather fascinating hearing about the national conference that these are the same kind of issues that we're dealing with. So officers are going to be trained to address those kinds of things, especially when we have some of our marginalized populations that may have some cognitive disabilities, mental health issues, literacy training, so that way they can understand this and recognize some of those trigger signs. Because I think there was a comment that was made by someone, well, if you're encountering a person that may have either mental health or cognitive disabilities, typically police officers are trained in what's called heavy control talk, and I'm not going to do it right here, but basically it's yelling orders, drop the knife, drop the gun, get down. And when you have people that have issues with loud noise or other kinds of problems, that does not work. That tends to elevate the problems. And so what happens is we train our officers to be more aware of these situations. We do that with our patrol officers too. But this is going to be strongly emphasized with our school resource officers that go into place because there's a greater likelihood that they're going to encounter it.
And law enforcement has very good training. So I had the privilege when I was an assistant principal in Prairie du Chien. I went to a joint training with our school resource officer from Prairie du Chien, and I was very impressed. A lot of the training had to deal with, even at that time, that was several years ago, had to deal with mental health, it had to deal with working with poverty, and some things that you might not ordinarily equate with law enforcement training, at least from the person who's not in it. But another advantage to having a youth services officer assigned to our school district is that that person can also receive specialized training from us and with us. And that's one area where I'm disappointed that it doesn't sound like it's going to be possible to have someone on board for our back-to-school in-service this year, but we do have in-service and professional development opportunities throughout the year, and having that person available to learn with our staff and to collaborate with our staff provides them a whole other realm of professional development.
Before I answer your next question, one of the things I'd like to comment on in hearing about folks going to the national conference, I would love to be able to collaborate and be able to send officers to that kind of training to understand what it is our educators are also receiving and what they're seeing throughout the country so we can develop these best practices. Be very interested in doing that. I'm very grateful that the city of Menomonie has dramatically increased our training budget over the last 6 years, and we've been able to accommodate a variety of specialized training versus the standard training that many of you probably feel that we have where we're just working with firearms or use of force. Most of our training now is really geared into customer service, doing crisis intervention, de-escalation, and other kind of intervention techniques used to try to minimize the amount of force or intervention that takes place with a person now. So if this is something that the school district is interested in and collaborating on, I would hope that you would consider us a good partner in that as well, and that possibly we could send some of our folks with your educators as well, so we have a good understanding of what their expectations are. Yes.
So my questions are in regards to students with disabilities, and I guess the first concern I have is that I am really concerned about behavior of students with disabilities being seen through the lens of a police officer.
Right.
And the training, I think, is essential for that. So then I guess a question to follow up on that is, and how maybe this has worked in the past with the other youth services officer, is are they aware that the child has an IEP when they're responding to a situation?
The liaisons develop those the current liaison would develop those relationships to understand that if a student has special needs, Disadvantage becomes if we have patrol officers responding, they are not going to have access to that particular information. If we have officers that are trained in those particular areas, and we know that, let's say, a student has some special needs, we know how to react. In fact, on a more global scale right now, is we're working with the Dunn County Criminal Justice Collaborating Council in an attempt to understand persons that have disabilities within the community and create a sort of a database. And we're a little ways away from doing that because we have privacy rights and things that we need to discuss to understand how to have a better response to those persons with disabilities. So that way, by our traditional response, doesn't make things worse, that we can understand an individual person's needs. So to address that concern, that is my concern too, because our object is to be helpful and try to keep the kids safe. And we do not want to be engaging in any kind of behavior or activity that makes it worse. And when you have folks that have some of those special needs on there, sometimes our traditional responses would make it actually worse. And that's why you're seeing law enforcement take a dramatic shift. And same with the Menomonie Police Department to address those kinds of issues.
And again, right now, we're expecting that one youth service officer is going to help serve 3,300 kids. Now granted, most of the situations would occur at the high school or middle school level, but we do have situations at the elementary school. Even 2 officers is going to be a challenge, but at least having a second officer who can establish some of those relationships, have the training, and have the consistency to get to know the students and staff, it really should have a very positive impact on our schools and community.
Another thing I was going to add to that was just to say that I want the focus to be criminal versus discipline. I don't want officers being put in positions where they are supposed to be disciplining these kids at all. I really feel like in my personal and professional life, I've seen where things go, they don't go well when that happens. And that, I mean, ultimately I want kids to be safe and I want teachers and administrators to be safe, and that's truly my goal. Information is key, and making sure that the officer has the information that he needs in that moment. Specifically, I mean, understanding that a child, one child with autism isn't going to look like another child with autism, and there might not be any obvious signs that the individual has a disability, but that I think that's where the communication comes in with the building staff and principals. So I just wanted to get that out there.
I appreciate you saying it, and thank you for doing so as well. I've worked with school liaisons for the better part of 20 years, and early on in the career of working with them and then eventually supervising them and then being an administrator over them, in situations where the officers have been part of the discipline has been completely ineffective, and I think that erodes the relationship and the trust that they have. And my personal philosophy is there is no place for the law enforcement to be part of the school discipline. I have faith in the principals or assistant principals or the other folks that are responsible for that discipline, and we do not participate in those things. When it comes to the criminal matters, yes, of course, that's our job to take a look at that. And we have ways that we work with that with our juveniles too as well. So thank you for saying that. I couldn't agree more with what you said, and we have no interest in being part of school discipline.
Okay, I just have one more concern, kind of piggybacking on what Tricia said. I guess my concern is, our staff needs to be very well aware too of when a police is warranted, because one thing I'm really concerned about is what if a teacher, has a discipline problem, and the first thing they say is, well, I'm going to call the police on you, if you don't straighten up, or use that, or whatever. And so I want to make sure, like criminal, yes, but I just feel, I don't want that to be like a gotcha game kind of thing.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think a big part of it has to be an education piece with our teachers too, when it's appropriate to contact us or contact the administrator at the school, to know when it's appropriate to bring in a law enforcement officer. And when I talk about the discipline part of it too, is if, let's say, a teacher has a student in class that's not listening and turning in their assignment, or maybe being a little bit mouthy with the teacher, that's not what we're there for. And part of that is to help educate to the teachers about when it's appropriate to call us, because again, I agree with what you're saying, is that we're not there to be part of the discipline to say, the teacher told you to turn in this assignment on time, they told you to sit in this assigned seat, you're not doing it. That's not what we're there for. law enforcement best practices are not to be involved in that, so that's something that's been identified for a long time, and we would look forward to working with teachers and staff on establishing that as well. So thank you for bringing that to
I love
attention.
what you said about policy too. I think that would be really helpful if we wrote a policy or maybe a job description of exactly what they do to an extent. I mean, there's some things that are going to be surprises, but, you know, maybe something to help with that would be really helpful.
I'd be happy to collaborate with the school district on something like that to try to provide clarification for the people that work within the school district and attend.
I have a question regarding their background. Is it a youth officer? Is it a police officer that's specialized for the schools? Or what is their educational background for the youth service officer?
The educational background may vary per officer. Some officers may have associate degrees as far as being hired, or some may have master's degrees. It just really depends upon the officer. Some officers have had law degrees. We don't have anyone with a law degree right now in our department. So the education level varies. They all start off as patrol officers, probationary officers. Once they're off probation, they receive a variety of training that takes place to get them to be a well-rounded police officer. If they're interested in a youth services officer, a school liaison officer, school resource officer, however you want to title it, then we start giving them additional training to be able to be successful in that particular position. And sometimes we can get it all at once, sometimes it's spaced out, it depends when the training is available. We do a lot of in-house training, so our current liaisons who've been very successful, Christopher King, who's an officer, has been great. Mallory Zassenhaus, who's our current youth services officer, is also wonderful. So we can provide in-house training, and because the city is very generous with the training, we're able to send people to specialized school resource officer training, mental health training, crisis intervention, de-escalation, all of those kinds of things to try to make sure that we're delivering the best possible product. Because as Mr. Sadowski spoke earlier, you're paying 60% of that person to be there, and I think you deserve a quality product. And so we need to deliver that.
And I think it's important to note that the chief has been really good about utilizing school district input in the selection of officers. Could you speak to that just for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. About 5 years ago, there was concern from the school district about wanting to be part of the process for selecting a school resource officer. I couldn't agree more. We had a collective bargaining agreement that was in process, a collective bargaining agreement that identified what the particular process was to appoint a person to a youth services officer position. We had changed that so that way we could have the school district input be part of that particular process. And I'm very proud of that fact. That way we can either have the district administrator or his or her designee come in and sit in on the process. So that way you get to see what your potential officer looks like coming in the door. And we want to continue that. We feel that that's appropriate. You're paying for part of it. You're expecting a certain level of service. I expect to give you a high level of service, and I want to make sure that we deliver and that you understand exactly what you're getting from the city.
Any other questions for the chief? A few other points of clarification or discussion then would be, we have, our current agreement is an ongoing agreement. It is a 60-40 split, and it is funded out of the general fund. The idea for the second position would be an officer that would serve not only the school during the school day, but also the community and do outreach to some of the other private schools in our community. The person would go beyond our walls and beyond our hours. And that's what allows the position to be funded out of the Community Service Fund. And DPI has very clear regulations on that. Leah and I have reviewed those closely. So that is why we're recommending, and why we did recommend in the last two preliminary budgets, that we utilize the Community Service Fund for these positions, for this position, I should say. Now, again, the city preliminarily has expressed support for an 80-20 share for the second position. And I guess that's something that the board needs to give us some input on. In talking with the chief and looking at the duties of what we anticipate for this position, I tend to think that the 60-40 split is appropriate. However, I am very concerned about having the second position. I am concerned about 750 students at the middle school, not really getting that kind of relationship right now with only one officer who is primarily stationed at the high school. I'm most concerned about our ability to respond to something on the east side of town, because between the middle school and between Oakland Elementary, we have over 1,000 students right there. And then from the city standpoint, you look at the hospital, you look at the other businesses that are right over in that area. I think it's something that's absolutely needed. So I guess I'm looking for input from the board in terms of getting back to the city. What the board could do is we could put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and the board could approve a contract for whatever ratio of split you think is appropriate, and give it back to the city council for their consideration.
So you're worried about time. Why do we have to do any kind of outreach to the private schools? What's the purpose?
Well, first of all, I think the students at the private school are going to be, most of them, a high majority of them are going to be coming to the public school. But I think that there's some cross-curriculum, some cross-relationships that will benefit those students, not only in our schools, but also our community. It also does allow us to use the community service fund compared to having it be an expense that would compete with other instructional services, social worker services, those types of things that are funded out of the general fund.
So how much time, excuse me, how much time would private school have? Like what?
I don't think we've detailed a particular amount of time. A lot of it would depend on the enrollment. It certainly wouldn't be as much as it would be at the middle school.
My question is with the 80-20 split, would that 20% be the community piece and the 80% be in our schools?
No, the 80% would, the city council is suggesting that the school district pay 80%,
well, that's what I meant.
and the city would pay 20%.
Yeah, but I mean, that other 20% that they're paying, would that be where it would go to the, where it would be out in the community and serving those private schools? That's something we discussed.
Perhaps somewhat. Also, we only have school certain months during the year, and I don't believe the plan would be to hire a part-time person. They would be a full-year employee.
Right.
So they also would be used for other community response. And there's several things that cross between the community and the school district. Different abuse situations or drug situations, and it's not a clear-cut school or community necessarily.
Between now and the next meeting, could we develop a more detailed, like, memorandum of understanding and present that to, I'm just trying to, I feel like we need more information down on paper regarding the specifics of some of the stuff we talked today, and then present that back to the city and see it.
You mean as part of like events that they would do, or?
Yeah, I just would like more information. And, I mean, would I rather have it be 60/40? Yeah, but I don't know. Is there any? Do you get the sense that there's any negotiation with that? I know you already started with that.
I do get the sense that the city council wants to support it, and my understanding of the discussion from the last city council meeting is that they've instructed the administration and the city to work with the school district on a possible agreement.
Can you speak in regards to, I know there was talk about Dunn County funding some of it. Can you speak to any of that? Like school district, city of Menomonie, and then Dunn County supporting this?
Yeah, there were some questions, and I know that's one thing the mayor brought up, is he would like to see the townships and the county contribute. A couple things there. First of all, if the school district is going to pay 60%, everybody in the school district is going to contribute, whether you live in the township, the city, or the county. Also, it is a Menomonie city employee. It's going to be an employee with the Menomonie Police Department under the direction of Chief Atkinson.
And did you address that with the mayor then?
Oh,
I agree with what you're saying. But, okay.
Yes. There's been many discussions about that.
Yes, Dave. I guess, getting back to Tricia's point, rather than have to draw up another description and everything, we have the chief right here. Could you address that some, what do you think their likely job duties would entail? I'm sure you have thought about very well.
Oh, yes. If you look at the proposal in there, you're going to get an overview of what that position would be doing. And as far as an actual job description, we do have a job description for a youth services officer, and I can certainly forward that to the district administrator to have it distributed to you folks. Frankly, what they would look at doing a typical day would be starting their day over at the middle school. They'd be addressing any kind of concerns that may come up through the district, either through the administrative offices or through the principals that are brought through in messages, either email or meeting. You would have any kind of responses to potential incidents that are taking place during the day. We'd be working with youth intervention, so if we found that there were kids that were struggling, either maybe it's neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, we would want to do an intervention on those. If we find out that that those kids do have those problems or issues that need to be addressed, we work with human services, faculty, and counselors to make sure those concerns are addressed. We have significant drug issues in our community, in particular methamphetamine, so we have a drug endangered children program, so that youth services officer will be part of that as a multidisciplinary team. To address some of the concerns when it comes to the parochial schools, really the vision for that is that if the parochial schools are interested in having an officer visit a classroom or talk about security or safety in the school, that's where they would come in. So the majority of their time is going to be spent at the middle school and our elementary schools, providing assistance to the students and the faculty there. That is essentially the crux of the day. And when you talk about incidents that may take place that are criminal in relation, those take a tremendous amount of time and resources, hours, if not hundreds of hours, depending upon the type of situation that's taking place. Like some of the bomb threats that we've had to deal with, that has taken well over 100 hours on some and some to 200 in approximation. And that's for those types of complaints. And if you start talking about ones where you have some significant issues that are taking place at home, and you need to place kids in protection, that takes a long time as well. So the day can vary depending upon the issues that may come up or the demands or what is agreed upon, especially if there's some kind of instructional piece that you would like the officers to engage in the classrooms, working with the students or the teachers. It just really depends. So it's hard to say that your day would go like this in an order, because it will vary. But they're going to be focused in on that school.
Thank you.
Yes.
Will this position be a new hire, or is this going to be an existing officer that's already on staff that's going to just be assigned a new job title?
Yes and yes. If that is so, you will get an experienced officer as a school resource officer. It'll be an additional position within the city. So I will hire a new person to replace that officer that has vacated that patrol position or maybe some other specialized assignment they might be in. So that's why the answer is yes and yes.
Yeah.
So you're going to get an experienced person. Yes, we will hire a new person, but you will not get the new person to be just thrown into something like this. It takes time to be able to develop the skills necessary to work successfully within the school district.
I guess my feeling is I would really like to get something a little bit more detailed on paper. I know that the day is going to vary, and I completely understand that. But when people are asking me out in the community, why did you support this, or I'm planning on continuing to support it, I want to be able to provide them with details regarding like this is what they're going to be doing. Nobody's going to be asking 8 to 12 or whatever. Specifically though, I'm curious about ongoing training, like who's going to be providing that. I think it's important. And then just, my other thought is if we could do something where annually we have, whether it's building principals, administration, whoever it is, to annually be able to speak with the officer to say, these are the concerns we're hearing about, this, what are you hearing, how's it going, just to have that update, I think would be really helpful.
So a couple, if you don't mind me jumping in, Chief. So first of all, if board members have additional questions or questions that have answered, but you'd like them in writing, maybe I can help facilitate that. If you just want to email me this week, I can put that together, I can get them to the chief, and then I can make sure it gets distributed to all the school board members prior to any kind of consideration. So certainly we want to make sure you get whatever information you want, so just email me And we'll work on either reviewing the job description or looking at the chief's proposal that was prepared for the school board, and we'll answer those questions. In terms of reviewing the school, the youth services position, that's something that does happen on an annual basis. And the chief has been here, I think, every year in the summer. And this summer's a little bit different because of the consideration of the second position, but it is something that, even though we have an ongoing agreement, is something that we talk about each year.
I'd like to say that I am fully in favor of having a second youth services officer, but it is 60-40 split. It's worked well with our existing officer. I don't think that at this point going 80-20 makes sense, and if we can kind of push the city's hand a little bit in that to make it happen, I think it makes more sense. I'm not saying we should take it out of consideration if they aren't willing to do it, but if it's not broke, why fix it? Let's add another, let's bring it in. It's serving another huge population of students and our community as a whole that are community members for the rest of us.
Have the private schools been asked to contribute to be a certain percentage?
No, and when I mentioned private schools, Tanya, and I know you're interested in that, it'd be like any other community service activities that we have. Maybe the easiest example to understand is some of the activities for middle school aged children. Those activities are community service fund activities. So students in the private school or parochial schools are also allowed to participate in those activities. And then that's what I meant by this, is that the officer would not necessarily be stationed at St. Joe's or St. Paul's or something like that. But like the chief said, if there was a situation where someone wanted to have someone come in and talk about police, or if there was something like that, it would be a community-based position, not that they'd necessarily be stationed there ever.
And a couple of points. One, also, Joe, like you addressed before, a lot of the community stuff is funded through the mill rate and taxes specifically. So
right,
the St. Joe's people and that are already paying a portion of that. So I don't think that's. Well, I look at our portion of taxes compared to some. We pay a ton of taxes out on the farm because of our real estate and that kind of stuff. So we do pay a lot of tax. Second thing is that, getting back to Penny's point on the 60-40 split, I think there's a lot of things that the city and the community as a whole has to benefit from that funding split, because even though they're spending a lot of time in schools, there's also a lot of time spent, things that are gained from having that relationship with the young students and building that camaraderie and the trust and that with police officers that benefits the city as a whole and the police officer group as a whole throughout the city.
I'd also like to say too, if we did consider the 80-20 split for this one, I'm thinking about the future, would the city come back and say, both officers now need to be 80-20, and then how would that put us financially? And I'm just thinking of the long-term effects if we did go down that route, so.
I think that offering to pay 60% of a position that's going to serve the needs that, essentially are going to be required of the city if there is a law enforcement issue with students, I think is adequate and actually very responsible by the school board.
I agree with Penny. I'd like to see the 60-40 rather than 80-20. If that, were to be available, or, to be able to negotiate. And I had another thought, but I can't think of it right now. Maybe I'll come back to it.
I guess the 80-20 was just their counter offer. So.
Well, I know.
60-40 was.
But he was asking a little bit ago about a consensus of what he wanted.
Oh, yeah.
About what he thought we could do.
So just to make sure I have a clear understanding of the board's expectations moving forward. So first of all, any information requests will be sent to me by the end of this week. We'll get the information and distribute it to the board. Second of all,
I remember. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering now, there's two different funds, right? When we talk about a school social worker, that's coming out of a whole completely different fund.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because the community gets the idea that when we hire a police officer, that's going to take away from mental health counselors and social workers.
Right.
So I just want you to clarify that.
Yes, the funding mechanisms in our school make that difficult to understand, but a school social worker, which we are in the process of hiring a school social worker, that is out of Fund 10, which is in direct competition, you could say, with our instructional staff, with our operations. The general fund is Fund 10. Whereas Fund 80, our community service fund, that is the fund that we're suggesting fund this position. That's totally separate. It's not in competition with the school social worker position. It's not in competition with instructional staff or operations. But it is directly placed on the tax levy. It's not a shared expense with the state. So then, just to finalize then, so the information, oh, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
This is a year-round position?
Yes, sir.
Your office, okay. So, what about the summers?
The summertime, they usually come back to work for the police department, and they usually are clearing up cases that have come in through the school year. They usually revolve around sexual assault or physical abuse. They might be around endangered children. So they may not be stationed in the school during the summertime, but they're still working on youth cases, doing juvenile investigations, and working with human services and such.
Okay.
But it is a year-round position, just to be
Yeah,
clear.
because, if we're gonna go to an 80-20, and we don't see them in the summer, that makes it hard to sell that.
I understand.
So the information request, so we'll get you the information distributed next week, or it may take a week for us to answer them, depending on how many there are, but certainly before any vote or any consideration would be taken, we'll get that information distributed. And then the other piece to it that I'm hearing is that there's a consensus to put together an agreement for the board to consider at the next meeting. That would include the 60-40 split. The board can then to talk about it more, perhaps consider it with a vote, and then at that point can continue to collaborate with the city council. Is that correct? Chief, thanks again for all your service, and thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for your time and consideration. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Your seat.
Item C, the strategic planning, SDMA.
So as the board knows, we had the kickoff to our strategic planning process. We had some focus group meetings with the administrative team and with the first meeting with the steering committee. Also, the folks from Student Education have provided information for the school board, and it's a good opportunity for the school board to provide some input. Basically, the things to talk about tonight, first of all, would be the focus group schedule. Studer's intent is to have focus group meetings that are open to the public. Anybody in the public could attend any of the outside focus group meetings, but then also to have internal focus group meetings with the different classifications of the staff. Brian has worked on scheduling that for August when the staff are back, but the students are not yet here. So we have a draft schedule of what that would look like. But then also, we're putting together a list of community groups that we want to make sure that we invite to the general session meetings. We also plan to utilize media, social media, our district email system. We certainly want to make it very clear to parents and to community stakeholders when the meetings are going to be held. So that was one piece of input that we'd love to have from the board. Are there any other groups that you think we should put on the invitation list? And then also there's a survey, because we know that some people either are not going to be able to make a focus group meeting, or they may not be interested in sharing their thoughts in public. We are going to have the electronic survey available for anybody, and a draft of that survey that Studer put together is available if anybody would like to provide input there as well. So at this point, I'll just turn it over for questions or comments. Thank you.
Yes.
I got a couple of comments. The survey, is there going to be more than one survey? So would there be one for households with children and then some without? Because reading through some of the questions, it seemed very, communicating with employees. I'm thinking of somebody about the Oaks. How would they have any idea? Supporting student learning needs, recognizing employees. Just some of these seem really redundant, and I don't I'd be afraid that some community members would read it and be like, oh, this doesn't pertain to me, and be done.
I think the intent, Tanya, was that there'd be one survey for all stakeholders that would be used at the beginning of the process as kind of a part of an environmental scan. And then there'd be a second survey towards the end of the process to make sure that the items identified by the steering committee were consistent with what the community felt. So I think there's two surveys, but I don't think they're intending on using a separate survey. I do know that there's a bubble there that says not sure. And I know that that's a challenge, and Stuart talked about that a little bit. Anytime you have a survey like this, you're trying to get enough detailed information, so you have to ask some detailed questions. But by doing that, you're also asking some questions to some people that probably don't know the answer.
Any other questions?
Got more. Sorry, I have more.
Yeah.
So let's see, which one do I have? Was curious underneath the focus groups if it would be beneficial to just have a specific call out for families with special needs, perhaps even including like DVR, ARC, maybe Center of Independent Living. I just think.
I got those three down. Do you have any more?
Sure. Nope.
Oh, wait, DVR, ARC, what was the third
DVR,
one?
ARC, Center of Independent Living, with a combination with families with special needs.
Okay.
I got a couple more to go over. UW Extension and 4-H, I think. And then, do we have anything from the Boys and Girls Club?
No, that's a good idea. I should clarify too, not only are we looking for feedback in terms of groups to make sure to get invitations, but also locations. Certainly our schools would be used as locations. I believe a few of the other ones listed were the library, the governmental center, I'm going off memory here, the leisure center, ASC.
Chamber.
Okay, chamber. Were there any other locations? I mean, because some of the groups you mentioned, I don't know if there's a good location that would make it more accessible or would encourage more people to attend that might not.
That workforce, what is it?
Workforce development.
Workforce resources.
All right, I need to make a note here.
Yeah, it's not done.
Yeah. CBTC.
Still on that, yep.
For a meeting location. That's our
And the outlying town halls.
What's that?
What's up with the
Town hall.
Town hall.
Oh.
Town hall.
You know, there is going to be a limit to the number of focus groups they can have. I'm pretty sure they were planning on using our outlying schools as a focus group session, but if you think substituting the town hall instead of the school, I just don't think, I don't think there'll be multiple meetings.
Possibility.
I just threw it
I
out.
was just thinking like, the town hall, out by Jake's, whatever township that is.
That's
there's-
Tater Town Hall.
Tater Town Hall. I mean, there's, Cedar Falls, that's a huge area for us, and that's close by, so it might be easier with people driving to Wakanda or something like that. Might be more.
So Tainter Town Hall.
It might be more convenient, something like that for people to get to the school.
Yeah, so Tainter Town Hall, would that be one to identify?
Yeah, since there's no school out that direction.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'm hesitant about is if we get away, it's nice to have the schools involved, and if you're going to involve all the schools, and then how many total listening sessions do you want to have? Maybe you have an idea already, I don't know.
They haven't set a strict limit, but
I guess just kind of feel that out and see. It's nice to get the community into the schools too, especially if they haven't been for a while.
Right.
But I think Jim's point about Tainter Town Hall, though, especially knowing the history and
Yep.
the fact that we had this school up there north of town. So again, for the invites, I wrote down DVR, our Center for Independent Living, UW Extension, 4-H Boys and Girls Club. Any other groups to invite? And then for the location, I wrote DWD, CVTC, Tanner Town Hall, in addition to the others that have been shared.
So you said DWD, are we talking the same building that's over next to the clinic?
Department of Workforce Development.
They don't have a lot of space there, but Workforce Resource would have a little bit more space if you're, I don't know how many people were.
The DWD is?
That's jobs.
Oh,
DWD is next to, it's with the probation and parole.
That like Green building?
Oh, the next commercial clinic. They just have one little small conference room.
I think we have a pretty comprehensive list, but if anybody thinks of something in the next couple days, feel free to shoot me an email. And I can't promise that we're going to schedule one for every site, but I think this is a really good list to work off of.
You haven't identified any student groups that you're going to?
Good point. Studer did talk about that, and I think upper elementary was the youngest, and then they are planning on having student groups at the middle school and high school, but I'll make sure that those are listed, how they plan to roll that out.
When you say upper elementary, what grade are you thinking, 4th grade on, or?
I think she said 3rd grade was the youngest grade they typically involve.
I just have one more, Dan. Reading through their letter and the update, the steering committee members will present the plan to the Board of Education for approval. There's 3 of us that are on the committee, so that's almost half of the board that we're going to turn around and based on our work and influence then is something we're going to vote on. So would it be helpful to not have as many people? It just seems kind of like a circle thing, like, oh, I get to help this, and then guess what, it goes in front of the board. So it's just, isn't that kind of double dutying, like double influencing?
What I can tell you from my past, Tanya, is that even on a board of 7, a lot of times there'd be 3-member committees.
Okay.
You know, in the Menomonie it's different because most of what we do is a committee of the whole.
Sure.
But having a 3-member committee, especially the board of 9, I would not consider that to be a problem. It could be tough as a committee member if you didn't agree with what the rest of the steering committee was bringing forward, but it shouldn't be a problem. And that brings up one more point. I see Joanne didn't really include it in her letter, but one of the questions that she asked me in the conference call last week had to do with board member involvement. And would the board like to have your own focus group meeting? You know, it's kind of tricky because the board does typically work as a board of the whole. At the same time, you've designated 3 people to represent the board on the steering committee, but the steering committee isn't necessarily a focus group either. So what Joanne has said is that she felt that if board members wanted to be instrumental in not just approving the plan, but also providing input, and didn't want to just do the survey and wanted to have a focus group, it'd probably be more appropriate to have a separate board meeting than to have board members participating at the community level, simply because, you know, the idea of the community focus groups is to really get the input from the people who aren't sitting at the table.
I guess I'd feel more comfortable doing that, because I think the board member presenting at a community planning session might sway other people and what responses you're going to get, things like that. I'd rather it be just the public commenting and not the board putting in on it. So if we could have our own, I'd be in favor of that.
So are you, then we can't attend any of these as a
No,
parent?
I think attend any minute, is it all you want? I guess the way I look at it, attend as many as you want, but just don't be, I'm on the board and I think that we need to do this, you know.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but no, but there's different topics that I would speak as a board member that I would speak as a parent, so, okay.
And that's what Joanne suggested, was that board members certainly feel free to attend any of the community focus groups, But she advised that board members really do most of the listening at that point, and having a board focus group meeting would allow the board members to share your thoughts. I will point out though, they're not going to be topical meetings. You know, there's not going to be a separate meeting for athletics and separate meeting for special education, special meeting for music. They're all going to be general meetings. So I'm not sure if that's what the board was anticipating or not.
So the same series of questions then for everybody, so you're gonna go to like 3M and Walmart and ask those people the same type of questions that you would ask parents?
Yes, it's going to be my understanding is that Studer has a set list of questions that they're going to ask at each of the general meetings. And then they're going to synthesize all that data to get the themes that come through.
Will we be able to see those questions ahead of time?
I'm sure we could. Let me make a note and I'll make sure we
So they'll be
share
different,
those.
they're different than the questions that we saw today.
Then the survey questions, yes. Yeah, they have special focus group questions.
Okay.
And there's not many of them because, you know, when you have a group, it's
Right.
even,
Yes.
you know, even the steering committee, I think, saw that a little bit.
I think it seemed like we had 4 questions, but or a couple questions.
She also suggested that board members do not attend the staff focus group meetings, just to have as much authentic dialogue for the staff as possible. Any other feedback or questions?
I just have a little red flag on the surveys at the bottom of where it says surveys in her document that she wrote. It talks about a list of key themes from the comments. It's the last bullet under surveys. It says, we'll generate a report containing numeric findings from the survey with the steering committee and Board of Education. A list of key themes from the comments will also be included in this report. Actual survey comments will not be generated in a document. I just have a little issue with that because I just want to make sure that when those comments are drafted into a draft, that they actually mirror those comments, because sometimes some of the positive and the negative ones might be kind of left out.
Sure.
You know, and looking at numerical is way different than looking at actual anecdotal comments, is all I have to say about that.
Would you like more information on Joanne and how Studer does that?
Sure, that'd be great.
My understanding is they have a staff of researchers and a staff of people that, because they do this all around the country, not just for K-12. I'm pretty sure they're doing CVTC's strategic planning also, but I'll get more information about how they plan to use the survey data.
Anything else? All right, so moving on to item D, discuss the elementary program.
Brian, go ahead and take this one. My voice is shot.
All right. This report is a new report coming before the board, and it is an update or general overview of the programming that we offer at K-5 at elementary. What is included in the general overview goes content area by content area, starting with math, then going into English language arts, includes our science and social studies, and then our music PE. In there, as far as a list of units by grade level, you'll notice that some of the grade levels use a common unit theme. For example, in the elementary music, art, and PE, there'll be some very similar themes or units that are covered, and then the way in which they approach those and the depth of understanding or the types of activities will then build as the student goes through. Of note, when you go through, I'd like to point out with science, you heard Lori Smith in talking about our model schools conference report that we have new elementary science. So what's listed there is a list of overview units by grade level. This will be our first year, so there'll be more work that will come on that as we go into more detail and learn what works with our district with those updated standards. Social studies, as I shared at our last meeting, we have new state standards that we've adopted. So what you have in this report is a list of our current units that are covered by grade level. That will actually be the area that sees the most update over the next couple of years. The state is recommending a 4-year rollout of that process. And one of the things that we did do is we took a look, and you can see as far as strengths of our current programming, as well as identified next steps or areas for growth or improvement. Our math and ELA are our newest set of resources and have seen the most update most recently at the elementary level. But all of our areas, we've identified common pacing as a strength that's gone through. Access to consistent instructional resources, and then you can see that list continues there. As far as next steps, knowing that we have new science and new social studies standards, and we have a new set of science resources, making sure that our staff are up to speed on how to use those resources and where that fits within our current instructional day. And then knowing that social studies is, quite frankly, our most out of date or in need of updating set of resources, as well as update of our curriculum maps. And that's been a topic of conversation as we've gone through our updates for each of our other content areas. And then knowing that with the implementation of K-5 English language arts and math over the last year, that has had a reduction in consistent time allocation in science and social studies, but that's something we're aware of. And our elementary principals and I have been having conversations with staff as to what that looks like, and that was actually a topic of conversation today as we went through to make sure that we are including the needed time in our day, but we all know that we do have a limit to how much time we have with students on a daily basis. So looking for, identifying opportunities for integration when possible, and sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not, but taking a look at, how do we reinforce language arts skills through the instruction in the social studies or the science and some of those pieces. Our staff are very knowledgeable of a lot of those opportunities, and in some cases it's simply going through and taking a look at what some of our defined non-negotiables are, making sure we're consistent with those, and then looking at what is the ability that staff then have to be more responsive to their students' needs in their classrooms. So if there are any questions that the board has, I'd be happy to answer those the best that I can, knowing that I'm not an expert in all K-5 instructional areas. I give our elementary staff a ton of credit because we ask them to do a lot in a day with students as they go through the process.
Are the scope and sequences for the grades, are they ever considered to be used on IEPs or in the gifted education plans for the students?
I would say, this is new. I would say yes. And we are having more and more discussions about making sure the standards are in the IEP so that parents have an understanding of what that looks like. Super.
So there's a lot here. Condense this down to a day.
Okay.
So I'm an elementary teacher, like how much time, I know it's insane having been in elementary, but how does, to balance all of these things out, what does a day look like for an elementary teacher with different topics?
You bet. What I'll say is it's going to vary by grade level, and I'm going to ask our elementary principals to chime in if they have any additional information to share. But depending on the grade level at our elementaries, in our multi-section, all 3 or 4, depending on the grade level, staff in most cases are going to be instructing the same content at the same time in their classrooms. And they're going to spend, in most cases, an hour and a half, in some cases close to 2 hours a day in language arts, so reading and math, speaking, listening, writing. And then math instruction is going to be about an hour to 90 minutes, again, depending on the grade level, depending on the day and the unit that they're in. Right now, science and social studies primarily is taught on a rotating basis, so every other day. What we are what we work on at the elementary level is trying to identify at least 30 minutes going into next year is what we're focusing on that alternating basis. That being said, we've had some conversation. In some cases, it makes sense if it's a lab experience that students are doing in the area of science, where doing every other day might not necessarily be practical. So do we do 3 days of science and then 2 days of social studies in that week? Because we are required to do weekly instruction in science and social studies. It doesn't have to be daily, but weekly instruction. So that the students will go through that. Art, music, and PE are encores or elementary specialists. That's currently on a 3-day rotation. So depending on the week and the sequence, they'll go through that. Those class periods typically are about 30 minutes when you factor in transitions and those types of things. Guidance is scheduled not necessarily on a weekly basis, but it's arranged based on the schedule and depending on topic, and you can see the overview that is included in there. That's a sample. In our elementaries follow a very similar layout depending on the time of the year. And then we included human growth and development in there as a standalone for 4th and 5th grade. And that is something that happens for 1 week. Typically, we try and arrange that near to our spring break. So when you take a look at a daily schedule, if you were to add up all of what I would consider recommended total minutes for each of the instructional content areas, you'd get a total greater than what our instructional day is, which is the importance of integration. Looking for opportunities where, again, we're going to reinforce, and in some cases maybe introduce a literacy concept or skill through having students read information related to the social studies, if it's Wisconsin history or whatnot. Same thing with science. Now, we can't do that all the time because sometimes, the piece that has been selected for literacy has been selected for a very specific reason because, the skills are going to build. In some cases, it's one example that staff might use, and that's where we get into our goal of having clearly identified essential understandings is important. So that our staff understand, what is the end result, that beginning with the end in mind approach. But when you do look at the structure of a day, there's a lot that our staff are asked to do, and I think they do an amazing job to be able to navigate that. So,
with every other day science and social studies, how much time does a teacher have to spend to remind them what they learned 2 days ago so they can start with what they have to learn today?
The reality is with any lesson, even if it's daily, there's going to be an element of that. By going every other day, the hope is to minimize that. In some cases, districts have experimented with going to a unit of science, then a unit of social studies, and then a unit, and then a unit. And on the surface that looks beneficial because we're going to get it all in succession, but then now we may go in maybe a month before we come back to that content area. So I think continue to have conversation and feedback from our staff. Again, one of our staff members recommended, could we look at doing 3 days, 2 days, 3 days, 2 days, and kind of rotating through. I think there's a lot of merit from that, especially coming from a staff member who is in the building, in the classroom, doing that work on a daily basis. But with any sound instructional approach, you're going to spend some time reviewing. What is the time? It's really going to depend. Ideally, you're trying to keep that under 5 minutes, I would say. It's going to depend.
I know, part of the 2nd grade curriculum has been the farming piece, and River Heights traditionally has brought students out to the farm. But I guess I just offered out, if any of the other elementary schools would want to do that. To me, it really opens the kids' eyes to be on an actual farm, to see how food is produced and things like that, the water-saving things that are taking place, and sustainability. A lot of neat things that they can't get in the classroom and carry this with, in some instances, kids for life, they remember that and some of that stuff. So I just throw it
Thank you, Dave. You know, and one thing that I'm really excited about as we look at our new science standards with Wisconsin, one of the elements is that local connection. You know, and when you talk about statewide standards, in some cases national standards, you run the risk of losing that local connection, and that's a point of emphasis with our state standards. So I know our staff that were meeting today at the elementary level, they were having lots of conversations when they were looking at the units of what are some local activities or local resources that they can call upon to help not only introduce but also provide some real tangible examples for students.
Amy. This is a lot of work, and I appreciate it a lot. And I know we had talked about this before, about, and maybe some of it's already being done. I haven't looked at the website lately to know, but I know that we talked about putting some of our curriculum online so that parents and stakeholders can see exactly what's being taught and so forth, and maybe the time level. So I'm assuming that when this gets finalized and whenever, that would be a great link to have for our families and people to take a look at if they're interested.
Yep. And actually our go live date for opening up our Build Your Own Curriculum site, which provides a little more detail than what you have here tonight, is in August for that. And truthfully, by the work that we did this last year, it actually made what you see in front of you really a very manageable task to go through and pull that, because you know, this is information that's readily available within that site. So, and we will include, now that we have this report will be linked off of our curriculum website as well. Again, providing a couple of different ways in which for community members to digest that information.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just a quick question. If you do use this document, just add some of the parentheses that are missing from it. After the days, or like before some of the days.
Oh, I see.
There's just a few of them.
Thank you.
Just minor.
Thank you.
But this is very nice. I appreciate it. It helps greatly.
I have a question. You know, there's a lot of discussion about kindergarten curriculum. And I noticed that there's a lot of academics, sight words and addition and subtraction, spelling, writing in kindergarten that's being required. And you know, I hear stories about kindergarten kids taking home, bunches of worksheets and papers and a lot of seat time stuff. How is that? Are we really pushing too much into our kindergarten? The first grade curriculum basically seems to have been pushed down in the kindergarten.
So the discussion related to kindergarten and our students, ready for the work that they experience in kindergarten is an ongoing discussion point. Our staff have had a lot of discussions about what do we do to make it as hands-on and discovery-based as possible. When we take a look at the standards that we do have, we are finding a lot of success with our students in kindergarten with the expectations that have been set. That being said, in relation to homework or worksheets that go home, not aware of a large amount of required homework in kindergarten. I know that there is a fair amount of opportunity for families that if they do choose to work on things with their children at home in kindergarten, that things do go home as opportunities for families should they choose to do that. As a parent of an incoming kindergartner, I'm pretty well versed in what does come home at that level. But I do know one of the pieces that we've identified as an area to spend time looking at Really, and when we look at the social emotional needs of our students, not just in kindergarten, but across the grade level, is an area that we know is something to focus on. And we've taken some initial steps at the elementary level. You heard second steps being something that was mentioned. We are actually implementing that in our 4K classrooms across the district for next school year. But it's something that we'll continue to have to take a look at.
So is the second steps done by the guidance counselors or done by the classroom teachers?
Both. And it depends on the need of the students. As far as the 4K experience, that will be delivered by the classroom teacher as part of their community building, part of their routine, establishing those routines. And then at the elementary level, it depends on the unit, depends on the activity.
So, I guess I wasn't referring to homework with kindergarten kids, but just the amount of seat time and amount of actual paperwork, that they're having to do, the amount of words that they're expected to read and to learn to add and subtract, and the expectations seem to be pretty high for kindergartners.
And I will say we've had a lot of ongoing discussions with that, and now that we are in year 2 with our current literacy resource and wrapping up year 4 with our math resource, one of the things that our staff have been looking at is what are some of the tweaks to make some of it a little more interactive with their students. And I think we've gotten some good feedback on there, but again, that's one of the reasons why we have the goal of taking a look at the identification of those essential understandings that the board approved at the last meeting, was to help give our staff the ability to be a little more responsive to the needs of the students that are present within their classroom.
I see a hand.
Well, I was just going to add to that if a parent's only assuming from what comes home that that's what's going on in the classroom, then that's something we need to do some PR work on, because to be in the classroom and see all the hands-on activities and all the group work that gets done and all the differentiation that occurs really is, I would say, a success story in our K-2 classrooms. Understanding that all children develop differently, but they all need to be still exposed to the same curriculum. So if that's something that you're hearing out in the community, whether it's Dan or anybody else, then I think it's important that we hear that, because then that becomes a public relations job. Because what I want to reassure you as an elementary principal, there are lots of hands-on activities and lots of differentiation going on. And we may have 2 or 3 kids in kindergarten writing paragraphs, but we've also got 2, 3, 4 kids who are still working on some basic skills, but they're all still being exposed to the same curriculum.
Okay. You mentioned the MAKE curriculum.
BYO, build your own.
Build your own curriculum.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's an online curriculum database that our staff use to document not only the unit titles, but also the topics that are covered, linked to their learning targets or their ICANN statements. And then there's another level that some of our staff use a little more intensively. But in a district of our size, knowing that we have 7 different buildings and staff that transition in and out to be able to have a place to house that is something that's very important. And our staff spent a considerable amount of time last school year going through updating that. And it's something that allows us to not only archive, but then as we roll out new courses, the staff will then develop those outlines within there, so that as staff transition out, we have that historical record as well.
That's something that basically teachers use, and that's not something that parents would access?
That's what we've been referencing, that we're going to open up public access to in August. It won't go to the depth that our staff see, but it will allow parents and community members to be able to see unit outlines and all the topics that are covered. To that level will be open and allow, again, if a staff or a parent wants to see a general overview of not only the course description, but what's the list of topics that are going to be covered, they will see that, and that'll be linked off of our website as well.
Will you show us that when you get it? I'd like to see. Perfect.
I just had one comment about the kindergarten programming. The thing that I see is you've got kids of all different levels coming into kindergarten. Some kids know how to read already, some, they're at all different levels, so you got to challenge the full spectrum. So, yeah, it's such a balancing act.
We want to make sure that we're providing an appropriately rigorous experience for all students. And again, going back to the fact that I commend our elementary staff, because when you take a look at the range of abilities that enter into a kindergarten classroom and then progress all the way through, it's a lot to do, and I think they do an amazing job doing it.
I agree.
Dan, before the next item, I know a couple of the principals have a community commitment at 7:30, so if you guys have to go, that's understood.
Thanks for the report, too.
Yes, thank you. All right, next item, E, policy 527.
Okay, so Katie did a lot of work on this, and as you know, we continue to review policies and look at recommendations from the School Board Association. Not long ago, the board approved updates to the acceptable use form for students, and I appreciate Katie going through these policies and rules and updating them to include the additional recommendations. Katie, is there anything that you wanted to point out for the board here on these policy and rules?
One thing I'll just mention is originally when we updated the student policy and the staff policy had been identical and didn't apply specifically to students and specifically to staff. So the update to the student one took out language that referred to staff out of the student policy. And again, now the staff policy refers just to staff, not also to students. So that's one of the biggest changes you'll see over the last few years.
There was also a change on Rule 362, I think it was, with the wireless network. Do you want to just let the board know about that?
Sure. With the access to Chromebooks and just the increase in devices to maximize our bandwidth, we are not giving students access to the guest network during the school day. That helps eliminate some classroom behavior issues and some parental concerns that we've heard over this last year of kids using these or leaving the classroom to try to use these in other locations instead of just using that district device for learning.
Can I ask a general question? Is it possible to turn off Google Hangouts on those Chromebooks, do you know?
Hangouts are off, but the chat feature does show up. So if there isn't a way to disable the chat feature itself, just the video aspect of it.
I thought you were going to ask about disabling Fortnite.
I don't even really know what that is. I
Me
know the
neither.
name, but.
Any other questions?
What do we do about students using their phones to create a hotspot and log on to something without going through the district stuff while they're in school?
Since it's a personal resource, we really can't control it. What we can control is where they have these out. So those tend to be times where they're in the cafeteria at lunch.
So the plan then, we'll bring back policy 527 for your consideration at the next meeting. The rules and exhibit will be put into effect after the policy is considered.
Ready to move on?
So what you're saying is we're only going to vote on policy 527, and then once that's done, then we'll do the others. Do we have to have another reading, or can we do it all together?
The others are administrative rules. They don't need to be voted on. It's just a policy that needs to be approved.
Okay, understand.
Okay. So we move on to I then.
Thank you, Heather, Connie.
Review of policy 185.
So I know that this is something that the board has discussed in the past, and this was the first committee structured meeting that we've had since April. With Memorial Day and then having no meeting at the end of June, this is the first time we've had a fourth Monday of the month meeting. And at one of the board retreats, the board talked about possibly scheduling the second meeting of the month differently. What we've done for the last several years is we have scheduled the second meeting of the month as a special meeting, which allows us to have the discussion, and then typically there's been some action taken as well. Now, one thing that was talked about at the retreat was the possibility of scheduling a committee meeting that would only include discussion, and then for action items, adjourn the committee meeting, and then re-adjourn, or reconvene, I should say, a special meeting, and then take action. Jamie actually, I appreciated her work. We actually had the posting all done, and we put the agenda together, and then we looked at what that actually was going to mean, and if there was action to be taken on the second meeting each month, that'd be 12 additional meetings, 12 additional postings, 12 additional sets of minutes, 12 additional updates and board docs. So when Dan and I met last week to finalize the agenda, we talked about it, and we talked about the idea of putting it on the agenda, Board Policy 185, to talk about it further. I know our consultant from WASB said that at one point when he was a superintendent, he had done that. At the same time, he was working in a school that, probably about a third or less of the size of Menomonie. Not that smaller schools don't have a lot of actions to take as well, but I can tell you from experience, it's not nearly the volume of what we deal with here. So I did link in 185 for the board review and open up for discussion. Dan, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think we will try to keep our agendas for the special meetings to discussion items only, and keep the action agendas is to only those things that have to be essentially taken care of, so that we can devote most of our time to this discussion, and keep things keep that as clean as possible. But it's going to be, it won't always be absolutely squeaky clean like that, where we can divide up one meeting for action agenda and one for just discussion. So, any discussion, questions?
Oh, sorry.
Dave?
I guess I hate to hamstring the district as, trying to say that we just want to do discussion at one meeting or action. I'd rather see us, I don't mind the way it was in the past, as long as we do a good job. I think we need to just reiterate at our board meetings that discussion has been held previously on this motion. That way, we're not hamstringing anybody as far as when we can have a vote on something or when we can have discussion type of deal. If we can let things free flow as they come through the board, through the administrative team, and that, I guess I'd prefer to do it that way rather than try to make changes to what we were doing.
I would like to point out, like for instance on this agenda, and we have had other special meetings that have had more action items than this, but if you look at it, like the E for E plan, Brian, I don't believe that had to be done tonight. So technically we probably could have pushed that back to August. However, the year-end budget transfers, those do need to be done. The 660301, really that should be done so we can get that squared away. So I guess, if we're going to be taking actions anyway, even if there's only one thing that is necessary, does the board, do you have a problem if we list other things to get them done? I do think, like Dave was suggesting, and I know we've talked a lot about it in the past, my understanding is that the real expectation is that as much as possible, there's a discussion at one meeting prior to taking action at the next. And that's really what our priority has been. But if you want us to pull things and only have things that absolutely have to be taken into action, we can do that. But at the same time, it's more efficient for us to get things done when we can.
Well, I think kind of the content or the intention of the policy is sort of that direction, that you try to do most of your discussion at this meeting and do most of your voting and reporting and stuff at the other meeting. So to be consistent with the policy, that there should be somewhat of an attempt to separate those out. You know, obviously, and it even makes, you know, room for being able to do that, what we're doing now, but still, it's kind of the intent of the policy to have a working committee and a support session. So, to be consistent with the policy, there should be some efforts along those lines.
And some efforts are made. I mean, it's, unless we're really in the midst of hiring season, typically we don't include a personnel consent agenda, although it's been more common now that you see more transition in employment groups, but typically that's reserved for the regular meeting. And I agree. I think Jim's right. The intent of the policy from I can't remember what year it was it 99? But I do think things have changed a lot, and I think, you know, things like board docs and the weekly updates that we send, I do think that, yeah, it was 19, and then it was revised or reviewed, I should say, several times since then.
Yeah, 14.
So I don't know. I would like a clear direction from the board what your expectation is, so we can make sure we meet or exceed your expectations.
I would like to say that we do the 2 separate meetings, but only when there's an absolute emergency to vote on something during the second meeting, just to go with the policy. And I think that, I know that that's going to make it prudent, you know, that administration and people that are doing the agendas make sure that the things that need to be voted on are in that first meeting, and the ones that are, you know, that aren't emergencies won't be in the second meeting, I guess. But I just think that just makes better practice. I think that's the reason we kind of went to those 2 meetings to begin with.
We will certainly meet or exceed whatever expectation the board sets. But one other challenge with that is that, so if we talk about something at the committee meeting, and then we bring it to the regular meeting for action, you know, sometimes things are actually talked about 3 times before there's, you know, a resolution. Again, I understand that there could be flexibility, and you call them emergency situations. You know, that's somewhat subjective, and I would appreciate the flexibility. I guess it is. It's going to require a conscious decision, and then a planning timeline that's going to have to be really thought out. And I guess I'm you know, kind of wondering what is the purpose? Is it so that everyone knows when we're voting, or is it the purpose that to make sure things are discussed first? You know, it's going to be a lot of planning, a lot of work, and a lot of thought to do that, which we will do. I'm wondering what benefit we're trying to get by doing that.
Okay, well, other board members may have their opinions, but that's just mine.
I guess I'm curious, Amy, from those that want to really segregate it, what is the goal? What is the main goal?
I guess it's because I think action needs to be taken in meetings for action, and discussion and working needs to be in discussion working. I just think that's just a better way to do things, just a better precedent. Maybe that's not a good enough reason, but that would be the reason I would say.
The only thing I would say is some of these policies were developed back when the board structured itself quite a bit differently. They used to have a ton of committees, committed everything out. And I wish Tammy or some of those that are a little long in the tooth before I got on.
I was in the committee, and the whole reason that we went away from the committee structure is because the committee would recommend something to come to vote, and they bring it to the board, and then all of a sudden the other 6 board members that weren't part of that committee would start complaining and saying, well, wait a minute, we're not ready to vote on this. We didn't even hear anything about this till just now. So that's why we went to the two meetings.
I guess I'm saying is that some of those policies I think are a little antiquated to as Joe says, as the district gets larger and we have, especially from an employee standpoint and employment, if somebody wants to early retirement or a new hire, things like that that are timely and have to be done, and I'd hate to be in Joe's situation to try and decide what's an emergency type thing and what's not. I'd rather just give our administrator the flexibility to work with Dan and schedule things as they need to be done and work on our, we've been very vocal about talking at meetings that discussion has taken place prior to this meeting on issues and things like that. And if it's something that we have to do more education on, I suggested, I think, in our board retreat that we have an opening statement when we come to the action items that, here's what, these items were discussed at the last board meeting, certain things or whatever, here's, how much discussion took place or whatever, and just make that our standard procedure at each meeting so people know that there was discussion that took place ahead of time. Then I think we're not hamstringing the board, the superintendent, our president as far as conducting business the way that they want to conduct business in a timely fashion. I just think that if we start to pigeonhole things and say, this can only be done then, or this can only be done at this time, it just restricts what they can do.
You have a policy that already states we should be doing that. And if we have a policy, we should be following it. And even when we talked to the WASB, when we had the retreat, that's exactly what he said. Your policy says you should have 2 committee meetings. You have a board meeting and you have a committee meeting. You have a discussion meeting and a voting meeting. So either we throw the policy out or we follow it. Or we follow our policies. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Throw it out. Change it. Either change it or follow it. That's the choice we have. And that's why I brought it up, because our policy says we should have 2 meetings and they should be distinct. So that's kind of where we're at. So do we follow it or do we just not have a policy?
I do agree with Jim that our policy should be more clear. What it says is that the second meeting each month will be a working session of the board and will involve wide-ranging discussion and debate on major issues. Action may be taken as needed on essential and timely issues.
I see it as this meeting, this second meeting of the month, is a time where we don't worry about whether we have to vote on certain things and we have to get through certain votes and stuff, and we can take our time to talk and discuss and debate, and then, but I think, because we sometimes get into other meetings where we have such a loaded agenda, and we have to get through all these things that have to be voted on, and we don't really have time sometimes to deal with issues. So I just want to make sure that we do have time to hash out issues, and then we bring them up for a vote at the appropriate time the next time. So that's my.
So then, as Joe read, then that policy does permit us action and discussion at the committee meeting, and it still gives us the flexibility to do either or. I just, we don't live in a perfect world where everything can be just.
Well, nobody, I don't think we said that. It's just that it basically said you have a working committee and you have a meeting, and calling them special meetings and then not having a working committee meeting is not following the policy.
I think what we want to do is make sure that we don't load this meeting up, this special meeting up with action agenda, so that we do have ample time to discuss things.
A couple points of clarification though, Jim. It doesn't say that we would have to post a committee meeting and a special meeting separately.
Correct.
But to take action, what's recommended by WASB is that we do post as a special meeting. If we post as a committee meeting and then take action, that could be problematic. So
I understand. I'm just saying that we never actually post a working committee meeting like we're supposed to, because we're always calling it a special meeting. And so it's like we've lost the working committee. We're really having 2 board meetings a month instead of having a committee meeting a month.
kind of. I mean, there are a few things reserved for the regular meeting, and we try to be conscious about that, but it's not easy. And then, the wording essential and timely, that is quite subjective. I definitely would not view that as emergency, similar to, what Amy was suggesting with with that. And then, and then it goes back to the question, if it already is posted as a special meeting because there is something that's timely, is that the only item you want on there, that's the timely item, and then push it all back, push the rest of it back, to wait till the regular meeting. And there are special circumstances like this one, had we only taken action, at the regular meeting, there could be some things that you won't see for quite some time.
Well, to get back to Jim's point, so does our policy read then that we have to have a committee of the whole meeting and a regular board meeting every month? Is that how it reads, or what, Jim, what you're referring to as a committee meeting and a,
Yeah.
how does that?
It refers to the second meeting each month as a working session of the board.
Right.
And will involve wide-ranging discussion and debate of major issues. Action may be taken as needed on essential and timely issues. So if there was no action, we could post it as a committee of the whole meeting, and there would only be a discussion agenda.
You know, and if this policy is outdated, then we maybe need to look at it.
That's what I was getting.
You know, that's kind of my point too. I mean, if this isn't working and we're not doing it right now, then we need to change the policy.
It should be more clear.
We should either follow the policy or change it.
I agree
Either way.
100%.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying.
We're on the same page.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Just a roundabout, yeah. I think we should tweak this policy to get it to match what we're currently doing, so then we're not in violation of the policy. So instead of having a second meeting be a working session, can we put and/or, working and/or voting session of the board?
Well, maybe could Dan and Joe get your heads together and revise this maybe and come back with something for us to look at later?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see too, there's several school districts that have 2 meetings a month, and, some of them, I'd like to do some research on how they're conducting business. From my perspective, this has been pretty effective the last few years, so if it's okay with the board, what we could do is continue with our standing practice. We'll still try to be cognizant of using the regular meeting for more actions than not. And then Dan and I can do some research, and at some point, whether it be at the next meeting or the next couple meetings, we could bring a recommendation. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right, is there anything else? Hearing nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.